Hi, thanks for that. I'm Ian Hatton. I'm the Chief Innovation and Economy Officer for the City of Gold Coast. My role takes into account a number of different things. I'm responsible for economic development and tourism, but also organisational change driven by technology. So specifically, we build IoT networks. We've got a small beginnings of a telecommunications company. We've got some cloud integration tools we've built in AWS. And the underlying purpose is try to generate customer and business value out of using new systems and tools. From a
Yeah.
Sorry.
Keep going. Keep going.
From a personal perspective, I don't have a background in IT. I've worked in manufacturing, some financial services, public sector, and the property industries. So I come at the whole change agenda and the technology agenda from an underlying bottom line performance perspective and a customer perspective, as opposed to having a strong view on the suitability of different technology solutions.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of what we're trying to do here is bring the end customer closer to the engineers, so that we can then help kind of build and create better solutions with the customer in mind. So if I kind of ask you then about what IoT means to you, how would you describe it?
I personally would take a view that IoT is really about data. So a lot of the things that we look at are, asset sort of tools, so information about what assets are doing, who's using them, when they use them. But really what it's doing is generating data to allow us to provide information to people about what's available and what's not, asset life cycle type things, investment decisions, and in some cases, where we're gathering information about asset utilization, the cleaning and maintenance regime. So people go to use it, say a barbecue or something like that, it is clean, it is in working order, so their experience is better. And at the same time, we're not under-servicing or over-servicing depending on the demand profiles. So I think predominantly for me, it's a way of generating highly accurate custom data to allow us to design the way we deliver services.
Nice answer, thank you. And I really liked your job title, because it was kind of Chief Innovation, but also Economy Officer. So it's this kind of tie between the technology piece or innovation, thinking differently, doing things differently, and the economy. How important is that in your choices when you're making IoT kind of choices, or even IoT versus other technologies?
It's one of those things that's evolved rather a lot over the last couple of years. So the branch was created just over 2 years ago. The reality is that the Gold Coast is a city that's heavily dependent on tourism. So tourists coming to the city, of which there are about 13 million a year, expect the place to be clean, well maintained, that the facilities are in good working order, etc., etc. So the IoT component with the economy is making sure that when people are here, they're having a good time, they're more likely to spend a bit more money, so that the economic benefits are in some ways indirect, but critically important. Council's role in supporting the tourism industry is about providing a good environment for people to sell meals and hospitality and theme parks and all of those sorts of things. So the more we can manage traffic congestion, cleanliness, safety, all of those sorts of things, the better the experience, the more likely people are to come back, spend more money, recommend it to their friends. So just as an example, tourism is potentially a huge beneficiary. And then from other economic perspectives, things like footfall counting in urban areas is useful for retailers and vendors to understand, what's the size of their customer base, are those people local or visitors, et cetera, et cetera. So again, we come at it very much from a data perspective, the IoT being a way of providing things that are meaningful, useful for other people or actors in the economy.
Yeah, people talk about the Internet of Things or connected devices, but the output is the data. And then the output of that is you making better decisions and providing better services.
But also sharing, where appropriate, sharing that data with other people so that they can get an economic benefit from it.
Nice. Okay, and then if we kind of take a step back and kind of look at the IoT ecosystem, when people are getting started, such as yourself, what would you say are the biggest barriers for you kind of getting started, or just some of the kind of technical issues or service issues that you have, or do you think that you have all of the services at your fingertips that you're looking for?
Um, I actually think for councils it's an extremely difficult environment to get into, because unlike agriculture or mining, where they've got, I think, a clearer path to generating business value from logistics or operations or something else, we've got a highly complex range of different services that don't have a lot of similarities in some cases. So the biggest challenge to start with is, where do you start? What are those things that are going to derive tangible, meaningful benefit that can then justify further investment? One of the earliest challenges we had was the network. So generally, there's a price per month per device for somebody to move your data from the device through to your back-end system. IoT, in my opinion, only really works at scale, is getting the pattern recognition and the other information that helps you make decisions that's important. So those two things are in conflict, in that to get the scale of data means that you're pushing up incredibly steeply the cost of the network. So we invested in our own LoRaWAN network so we could control that cost and take some of the pain out of the scale deployments. The other component that I think is particularly difficult is the IoT industry, as far as councils relate, is still very immature. So I think the price point and performance of the devices and systems is not really in alignment with the realization of the benefits are for councils at the moment.
Okay, and as far as kind of then getting that more into alignment, you said that you've been in IoT for about 4 years, so there's already been a lot of change.
Yep.
Just where do you see the industry right now on that maturity curve, on being able to be delivering the right services at the right price points for the market?
I'd say in a sort of a business life cycle sense, it's come out of the sort of early storming and forming kind of aspects, and there now needs to be some standardization across our sector, because there's 600 something councils in Australia are all trying to solve similar things, doing it all separately. So I think there's an opportunity really for different government agencies to start to put together some alignment and solving some problems once and for all, because they're, whether it's traffic management, people management, asset management, or whatever else, we all fulfill broadly similar services. So I think we've collectively got to mature over the next year or two to start, finishing the job in a few places, and then, it could be some volume purchase through vendors and things like that. So this continued, everyone doing similar things independently is, I think that needs to change. Okay.
So if we now talking about change, we kind of flip and look at this from a slightly different angle. So in IoT right now, there's so many options for the very deep technical information. But when we actually look at the people behind the solutions, there's a bit, it's trying to work out the kind of skills and approach that you need now versus the mature environment of tomorrow. So right now we're much more in this entrepreneurial phase, this storming phase, trying to find the normal. I asked you what your kind of leadership style was, and you talked about diplomatically disruptive, which I thought was I was totally excited to hear you describe what that means for you.
It really is having a mandate to ask challenging questions of the business, but then not create some sort of centralized mandatory obligation. I think, any kind of organizational change, particularly when there's fear and legitimate fear around, the impact of robotization and automation, all those other things, the worst thing to do is to start driving a mandatory agenda through the operations of business. So we decided to work predominantly with those parts of the organization that wanted to work with us and embrace the change, and then sell the benefits, but then use that when we're at a more mature stage and those benefits are tangible and realizable on the bottom line or with customer feedback, then start to just push a little bit harder into the more reluctant parts of the business. So we reserve the right to ask difficult questions, and when we engage with the business, we quite often offer two versions. We can come along and act as a fairly gentle consultant that does a bit of probing and pushing, or we can go quite hard and ask fundamental questions about why do you do that? Why do you do it that way, and why don't you do it another way? Interestingly, most of the businesses, the parts of the business we work with, have gone for the latter. They just want somebody to come in and critically examine the way they do things. So the diplomacy is that it's non-mandatory, and the disruptive is we genuinely do try and get in and force the business to think about different ways of doing things. And IoT for an organisation like ours is potentially extremely profound, because we have thousands and thousands of assets and things that you can put a device on and get real insight into what's going on in the field.
Cool. And then throughout this, I've frozen a little bit there. So throughout this interview, you've talked about customers quite a few times, and you've kind of referred to your tourists, you've talked about your population, and you've also talked about your internal stakeholders within your own organization. How important is the customer when it comes to an IoT solution, for those creating those solutions to have that in mind? And the layers of customers, I think, is what's coming out from you, is that because you're perceived as a customer, you came into this because you're someone else's customer. Do you want to just talk about kind of how you approach the customer in then these IoT projects?
Yeah, part of what we're trying to do, there's a new strategy recently adopted by council, which is a customer experience strategy. So it's a fairly different approach from a council perspective. So most of what we do, in my limited experience in government, is we design things from the perspective of delivering something to somebody, not designing it for the person consuming. So that's really one of the underlying components of that strategy. From an IoT perspective, it's really about gathering the information that's not subjective to an individual, but it's patterns and trends and usage and satisfaction and those sorts of things, and trying to get that in the hands of the service delivery people as quickly as possible and in as manageable a format as possible, so they can actually action the things that it tells them. So I think it's an alternative to surveys and questionnaires and as I say, sort of subjective individual things, and just a better way of making sure that assets are well maintained, things are available when they're demanded, that things are, again, barbecues are located in a park where people actually want to cook food, not somewhere where there's no demand. So it's critically important when you've got millions and millions of people transacting.
Nice. Okay, and then also just again, more from a personal perspective point of view, or when you're thinking about working with IoT, what does success mean to you?
To me personally, I think to see there's two levels to it in my view. One is to see a genuine impact on some of our corporate KPIs around cost effectiveness and customer utilization and satisfaction. But from a personal point of view, it's really quite satisfying. A couple of the projects we've done where there's somebody who's kind of championing it in an operating department, and a whole phalanx of people who really aren't interested or don't like it. And you get to the end of the project and you've got a bunch of people who they may not be zealots for IoT, but they understand the value and they're consuming it. And to see people consuming a near real-time dashboard that's telling them what's happening with their assets, for example, is very, very satisfying, particularly if they're a bit skeptical at the beginning.
Yes. Okay, and then just as we begin to finish off, I also would like to know what advice you would have for somebody, say another council who are just starting this journey with IoT. What advice would you have for them to when they're beginning to get started or wanting to take this step forward?
The most important thing, and the thing that we got right which was a bit of luck and a bit of judgment, is to get somebody employed that actually understands this. I think there's a strong sales motivated vendor ecosystem out there that probably still has quite a bit of immaturity in there themselves, so that the value proposition isn't entirely clear in a lot of what we do from an IoT perspective. And people have got sales targets, and and a lot of people are very well-meaning and want to roll out their technology. But I think if you don't have somebody with IoT expertise to provide that independent advice to the service delivery departments, they'll quite often get a vendor solution, doesn't do half of what they think it's going to do, or the price point doesn't work, and that's detrimental then to the reputation of IoT. So we've now got a reasonable sized team, but we got an expert in very early on who was able to really help drive some results that we can anchor the rest of the decisions. So that, of all of the things, I mean, we've learned a lot of lessons over the last few years, but just getting somebody in-house that's not got a vested interest and can provide that advice and remunerate them appropriately. But in the absence of that advice, you're shooting in the dark a little bit, really.
Yeah, and setting the right foundations. You have to live with those foundations for a long time, and whatever you put in place.
Yeah, and the other thing that we found is it's almost the antithesis of traditional IoT. That we've got a few projects that we've ended up bringing to full realization for something that was never intended for the project. So we went out trying to solve a problem and then realized the information we were gathering was really useful for something else that we hadn't realized. Some of those projects have got multiple millions of dollars worth of benefit for the organization. So I think you need a bit of a license to go and trial some things with good intent, good design, good processes around it, but give yourself again the freedom and the flexibility to have a good look at it when it's in the field and see what other uses it's got.
Yeah, I think that's a little bit of you don't know what you don't know. You start measuring it, and all of a sudden you go, whoa, we can do something differently here.
Absolutely.
And I do think there's a huge opportunity for that, because all of a sudden knowing all of this information from all of these assets, of course you find out something you haven't heard, you didn't know before.
Absolutely.
But you have to take that leap. Okay, and then as a really, really short kind of answer then about just what you see the kind of the top 3 benefits of IoT.
Real-time or near real-time information about what's going on with your assets. Marrying demand with supply for where people want to consume assets, and actually understanding the life cycle cost and benefit of assets.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Ian.